What follows is yours for free, but do have a look at all the other things we do on patreon.com/word in your ear. And now, on with the show. Another Word in Your Ear, where we're looking at a terrific new book about the magnificent Scottish poet and humorist and writer and performer Ivor Cutler, with its author, Bruce Lindsay. Bruce, it's lovely to see you. I mean, the first thing I think we ought to establish is, and your book is called A Life Outside the Sitting Room. First thing is how would you describe Ivor Cutler and what he did? How would you put that?
How would I describe? Somebody who'd never known him. It's this sort of slightly gnomish, heavily Scottish accented poet, come playwright, come children's author, come performer, come songwriter, come activist, with an immediately recognizable voice, possibly one of the most immediately recognizable speaking voices in the entire world, and a very individual approach to his arts.
So, yeah, that's a good point, because, you must presumably bump into people at parties and say, what are you doing? I'm writing a book about Ivor Cutler, and they go, who the hell's Ivor Cutler?
Who the hell's that? Yeah.
And I suppose what you're really saying there is you probably know him, though you're not aware that you know him. Is that fair to say? Yeah,
I think anybody, certainly of kind of our generation, he's been there. You've heard him. You've heard about him or of him. You've seen him on TV, or you've seen him on Magical Mystery Tour. He's everywhere. I describe him recently as kind of a bit like a Zelig character.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, he's there or thereabouts everywhere, right from the end of the 50s, almost to his death in the early noughties.
That's what I couldn't believe during the book, my God, he did all those things. And then he popped up on this, and then he was on that, and then he was a regular on this. And I have no memory of it. There's certain bits of it I remember.
It was quite well known in the late 50s. It was incredible. But there's a bit in the book where, I can remember seeing him on Magical Mystery Tour when I first sort of heard of him, and then hearing Gruts for Tea on the John Peel show. I can remember vividly the impact that had. But you describe your first encounter with him very vividly in the book. So tell us about that.
Yeah, I guess it's slightly unusual that I encountered him on the page rather than on the radio or the telly. And unusually for me, I can remember almost to the hour when it happened, because I was a very precocious Billy No Mates kind of teenager, and I'd gone to see Centipede, this 50-piece contemporary jazz ensemble.
Not Slade, ladies and gentlemen. Centipede.
Centipede at Lanchester Arts Festival in 1971, and I was on the way home, and I picked up a program on the way out of the hall, and it said, the rest of the festival program includes these people, and there was this poem. I was being driven home. My dad was driving me home, and there was a poem called Shoes, and it simply went, I think, thin shoes tell us more about the world we live in than thick ones. It's quite amusing. Sort of sparked a bit of a giggle from 14-year-old me or 13-year-old me or whatever I was. And it was written by this bloke called Ivor Cutler.
Right.
I'd never heard of him, and it turned out he was playing the festival the next night. I couldn't get back, so I didn't see him. He was playing a gig supporting Curved Air. Which, again, how he managed to do things like that, we might come on to. And then shortly afterwards, I heard him on a Peel session, and that was it, really. When you put the voice and the words together, it becomes instantly unforgettable, I think.
That incredible sing-song tone that he had.
Yeah.
Exaggeratedly Scottish, wasn't it?
It was. I mean, he claimed it was a combination of growing up in Glasgow, going to Jordan Hill Teacher Training College, and going out with a girl from Ireland. And he said his accent is a combination of all three of those things. But of course, he was brought up in a Jewish family as well. So he grew up listening to Yiddish a lot and listening to Scottish spoken in with a sort of East European accent as well. So it's all of those things create that.
And who would have inspired him? Was it the Goons and people like that? Was it the Marx Brothers? I mean, what would he have been listening to and watching?
He certainly acknowledges Spike Milligan on more than one occasion as a Spike, and therefore the Goons he listened to. Ivor was born in 1923, so the Goons appeared when he was sort of in his late 20s. And he acknowledges he listened to the Goons and he enjoyed Spike Milligan. I think when he was younger, he must have seen the Marx Brothers. He went to the cinema in Glasgow, and around the time they were producing the great Marx Brothers movies, Duck Soup, Horse Feathers, Night at the Opera. Although I couldn't find any direct reference to that, I do suggest that in the book. Franz Kafka, of course, beloved of stand-up comedians everywhere.
Yeah,
a smile, a song, and a large beetle. And he says Kafka changed his humour from childlike to adult. So there's Kafka is a big influence as well. I think Ivor soaked up influences from all over the place. I mean, he was a visual artist as well. He enjoyed drawing, painting, and sculpture. So Juan Miro is somebody else who gets quoted, and various other people that he worked with. Sometimes the influence lasted a few years, sometimes it lasted a lot longer. Lenny Bruce was another one. Lenny Bruce played a residency at the Establishment Club, Peter Cook's club in London, in the early 60s. And Ivor also had a residency around the same time. And Ivor would go and see Lenny Bruce, and he said, fantastic influence. Again, another Jewish comedian who grew up in the middle of a large immigrant community in a large city.
It seems so amazing that somebody that unorthodox, got on television, because, I mean, Ned Sherrin put him on a show, didn't he, on a television show in about 1959. It seems astonishing, really, how open-minded people were. Yeah.
And his first broadcast, I think, was on TV. It was on that programme, Tonight with Cliff Mitchellmore. Ivor had tried for a couple of years. He moved to London in 52 and started writing songs fairly soon after, and not poems, but songs. And he tried for a couple of years to find somebody to publish them, with the idea being that he would be the writer and other people would record. And nobody did until he walked into the offices in Denmark Street of a publisher called Box and Cox. Very close, sort of 17, 18 years later, to where the Sex Pistols used to rehearse. And Mr. Box seemed quite taken with Ivor. And so he got Ned Sherrin round one evening with his friend Carol Brahms, the writer, basically to have a look at Ivor playing some songs. And Sherrin writes that they arrived at the offices of Box and Cox Music Publishers of Denmark Street to find Mr. Box peeing in the sink. So they walked in, and Mr. Box...
Showbiz. The glamour.
Steadied himself, the glamour of showbiz.
Yeah.
And Ivor sang a couple of songs, and Ned Sherrin, bless him, put him on the programme the following week, I think.
Because that's a key thing, isn't it? He was really a performer, wasn't he? You didn't necessarily want to read what he wrote. You wanted to hear him
perform it. Yeah.
Say it. So it's like, it only really struck me when Mark and I did one of these chats with John Cooper Clarke not long ago. And John Cooper Clarke is a performer.
Yes.
The poetry is part of the performance, know, but you get a certain persona, which, has an effect. He's dramatic and funny. And I suppose Ivor Cutler was that kind of seam of performer, wasn't he?
Yeah, I think that voice is so distinctive that even though I first read him rather than heard him, as soon as I heard him, I can't pick up anything of his now and not have that voice
hear that
reading it to me.
Yeah, the test case is that you can't imagine it working if anybody else recited it. It's like with John Cooper Clarke. Those poems don't work unless they're done by John Cooper Clarke. They don't translate beyond that, really.
Yeah, I think that's true. There's a certain something added with those very distinctive voices that you don't get just by reading them in your own voice. And I mean, a lot of Ivor stuff makes absolutely no sense when you read it off the printed page anyway. And yet when he reads it to you, that sense appears to magically appear.
Yeah.
Even though at the end of it you think, well, actually, I don't really know what that was all about. But hey, there you go.
I was intrigued by the idea in the book that he invented himself, didn't he? So it was he wasn't a superstar, but he sort of treated himself as if he was. You know what I mean? He can make his own rules. You know what I mean? Yeah. And a lot of the time, you in the book, you're saying, well, that's what he said about himself. But I went and checked with somebody else, and they said, no, he used to say the opposite of that, the day after. Tell us about that.
Yeah, I mean, Ivor did invent Ivor Cutler to some extent. But I think it's Hunter Davis in one of his books about the Beatles said if Ivor Cutler was artifice, he kept up that artifice for his entire life. So I think artifice is not the right phrase. But Ivor, if you see photographs of younger Ivor, he gets more distinctive physically, visually, as you go through the years. Ivor in the RAF looks pretty much like any other young RAF recruit. Ivor teaching looks pretty much like any arty 50s, 60s school teacher wants to look. But then gradually he becomes this very distinctively dressed man. He went through phases of liking different styles, but always very distinctively dressed. A selection of hats, a seemingly endless selection of hats, jumpers, brightly coloured waistcoats, jackets and so on, and plus twos, and shorts and all sorts of things that he put together with this persona, as you say.
Was any of that an act, do you think? Because there's a bit in the book where people always talk about him as being eccentric, and he said that he wasn't eccentric, everyone else was eccentric. And then you get all these stories about how he's on tour with somebody, I think it was Van Morrison, and rather than sleep in his hotel room, which was too hot, he went off and slept in a waiting room somewhere, I think.
Yeah, these stories, it's like David was saying, you hear a lot of stories from Ivor, which vary slightly in the telling.
Yeah.
But the Van Morrison story came to me from a couple of sources. And he toured with Van Morrison. In fact, the first time Andy Kershaw ever set eyes on Ivor Cutler was on that tour. And the story, Ivor hated hotels. Over the years, he grew to really hate hotels, to hate being away from his own flat at night. And he didn't like noise, and he didn't like air conditioning, and he hated muzak.
Yes, he didn't like applause, did he?
He didn't like applause.
Applause is a whole different thing. But I mean, he wouldn't even get lifts if they had music in them. Is that right?
Yeah,
that's right. He hated music. And so one night, on tour with Van, he got, Van was a fan, made sure they got into good hotels. But this particular hotel, for whatever reason, too much noise, too much air conditioning, whatever, Ivor just couldn't settle. So the story goes, he went to the local railway station and slept on the platform. But the weird thing about it is, when I've seen it written down, Ivor says it was a hotel, I think, in Shepherd's Bush, which is very odd because Ivor lived in Laurier Road.
It's not far away.
Yeah. Why would he have gone?
Why would he go to that Shepherd's Bush hotel? So whether it was a hotel somewhere else, I don't know, but it's a story that follows Ivor around, like many stories. But I think he enjoyed the retelling of stories in slightly different fashions to confuse journalists and interviewers and people. And as he got older, some details got missed off. And the RAF story, which often people talk about, where some genius in the RAF at the outbreak of the Second World War decided Ivor would make a good navigator, which I've never understood. So they sent him on a navigator course. I mean, in fairness to Ivor, I must say, he volunteered for RAF service. He wasn't conscripted. He went in as a volunteer. Somebody thought he'd make a good navigator. He got as far as Canada for his training, his one trip to North America. And then at some point he failed the course and he left. He never became a navigator. But the variable ways of the telling of that story, they're almost endless. The thing people pick up on, which they think is very funny, is that he was booted off the course for being too dreamy. And Ivor says, I didn't really enjoy plotting courses. I like looking at the clouds and looking at the stars. But the idea, if he was dreamy, the idea of sending an air crew up in a Lancaster bomber with a dreamy navigator is just terrifying. I mean, they wouldn't.
Very good grounds for dismissal to me.
Absolutely. You just wouldn't want the man anywhere near your navigation equipment when you're trying to fly over enemy territory and dodge flak and ME-109s and whatever. But it's another very common story about Ivor that you hear. But the thing that struck me right in the book was that a lot of what people said to me about Ivor, people who remember him from Peel centuries, is about those post-Peel years, and they didn't really know anything about his earlier stuff. We've touched on about being on Tonight with Cliff Mitchell. So I wanted to dig into that, like you say, how Ivor emerged as a performer.
It's absolutely fascinating to me, that whole life. I'm a classic case of I only knew him really through John Peel and
me too,
so forth. And but he taught for a long time, did he really? But he taught at Summerhill, which
Yes,
was the
Very
wild
progressive school.
free progressive school in Suffolk. Is it in Suffolk?
Yeah.
it is, yeah. Yeah, he spent a couple of years at Summerhill. He started teaching in Paisley in Scotland.
That's a change. Paisley to Summerhill.
Summerhill, because he was Glaswegian. He went back to Glasgow after he left the RAF, and then he did teacher training in Glasgow. He taught in Paisley, where it was very strict Scottish education, and teachers were expected to strap the children regularly. And then he went to Summerhill, this very liberal school founded by A.S. Neil, who was an educational reformer. And he loved A.S. Neil. I mean, he's one of the few people he consistently spoke highly of. He said, I loved that man. He was a saint. And yet he only stayed at Summerhill for 2 years. And I spoke to A.S. Neil's daughter, Zoe Reedhead, who now runs the school. And she remembers Ivor being there, but she was only young at the time, couldn't remember why he left. But it seems quite odd that he would have left somewhere that seems to suit his approach to teaching, almost, perfectly. But after a couple of years, he had gone. He said it was because there weren't enough women around, which again might be true because Ivor did enjoy the company of women throughout his life. But he left Summerhill after 2 years and came to London and taught for the Inner London Education Authority for the rest of his career. So his teaching career is 30 years long.
So there's quite a lot of prominent people were taught by him.
Yeah, I mean, the great thing, he taught primary school mostly at Paddington Green and at Fox Primary in Notting Hill. And Notting Hill attracted a lot of artistic people, so their children went to school and were taught by Ivor. Roger McGough, the poet, his children were taught by Ivor. Ken Russell, the film director, his children went to Fox and were taught by Ivor. John Williams, the classical guitarist, his daughter Kate, who's now a jazz pianist, she remembers being taught by Ivor as well. So he did teach quite a few children with prominent parents, but who also became quite prominent in their fields. Ken Russell's son Xavier, for example, is a leading film editor now.
Right. But also you get this the syndrome of him sort of becoming well known through Peel and Magical Mystery Tour, and people not really connecting him with the person that they knew as a school teacher.
Yeah, some people did, some people didn't. I think if you were in that kind of artistic community broadly, you knew who Ivor was, and one or two people certainly did. Roger McGough did, and Ken Russell did. But a lot of other parents had no idea who he was, and he didn't talk about it very much with his kids, his pupils, unless they asked him. So if one of the people said, we saw Magical Mystery Tour on telly, was that you, sir? He would say, yes, that was me with my friends, the Beatles. But he wouldn't make a big deal out of it. The fact that he appears with the world's leading popular beat combo.
That his adoption by the counterculture, as it were, is a very big, important part of people getting to know him, wasn't it?
Yeah. And again, it's something which started before the Beatles. He was adopted, if that's the right word, by International Times. There's a cartoon in the book which is just signed Cutler, so I've no 100% proof, but we're pretty sure it appeared in International Times. We're pretty sure it's one of Ivor's. So he was adopted by the International Times almost from its first issue, so 2 or 3 years before Magical Mystery Tour. In fact, he played a benefit gig for IT at the Roundhouse, I think, as well. But mostly when he talked in later years about that adoption by the counterculture, he puts it down to Peel, and he puts it down to Peel sessions. The Beatles, he did Magical Mystery Tour, and then he did an album which was produced by George Martin off the back of that. But most of the countercultural stuff was from Peel.
And Peel stuck with him. I mean, I think a lot of the attraction for people like the Beatles was he was doing outrageously adventurous and uncommercial things that they wanted to support. But, Peel tended to drop people. But, he was still playing him, wasn't he, throughout the 80s? I think, apart from The Fall, I think the most number of sessions on the John Peel show were by Ivor Cutler. Was that right? It
is, yeah. I mean, I think David Gedge squeezes past by virtue of being in a couple of different outfits. But Ivor as Ivor, I think he did 22, and I think The Fall did 24.
Yeah.
And he was performing on John Peel sessions into the 90s, and then sort of Andy Kershaw took over.
And made such good radio too. It sounded so incredible. Him with his harmonium, just wonderful.
Yeah.
It's also worked in contrast, didn't it? Because that was the interesting thing about it.
Yeah.
That you could have the Edgar Broughton band or the Fall or whatever. And then you would have this guy with a harmonium or whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, when Ivor started on the Peel show, Peel was playing a lot of, he was still playing early Tyrannosaurus Rex. He was playing Martin Carthy, a lot of folk and stuff as well. But Ivor even rises above those. I mean, the harmonium just sort of droning. It always had kind of clattery keys. It was never quite in good regard.
Yes. Yeah, that's true.
And he would clatter away on the harmonium, a fairly simple instrument, which he enjoyed partly for that reason. And he would recite or he would sing over the top of the harmonium these very strange and bizarre stories, some of which would last literally 8 to 10 seconds, and the occasional one which might extend beyond a couple of minutes, and then some of his storytelling, which goes a bit further. But yeah, it was a real contrast. Peel was playing, blues, prog, and then punk, and then post-punk, and
But there's always a place in broadcasting for the person who provides the contrast, isn't there?
Yeah.
It's like you're going back to the Tonight Show, Cliff Mitchell or whatever.
Yeah.
It's contrast there, isn't it? It's contrast with John Peel.
Yeah. It's difficult to know how the Tonight Show didn't go down too well. I mean, again, there are 3 or 4 different versions of how long Ivor lasted on the Tonight Show. He says he was booked for 5 days, but they banned him after 2. For being too odd, too much of a contrast. There's another story that the power blew on his first night, so they put him on for the second night and then decided they'd had enough. But Peel, as you say, stuck with him. Peel's listeners were very different, I think, to Cliff Mitchellmore's viewers. And the Peel show, they liked Ivor. He never made it into a festive 50, which I find quite surprising. I thought he might have snuck in, but I couldn't find any reference to him in one of Peel's festive 50s. But he did. What's strange?
Not sure if he had fans as such, did he? That was more of a fan thing.
Maybe, yeah. I think Ivor has a very strong base of followers and fans today, but we've come to him at different points.
Yeah,
in his history. The ones who came to him through Tonight and the radio, the home service radio shows are kind of getting that bit older, and the younger ones who are coming to him even now through Six Music and the repeats of sessions and people like Tony. The fan base stays; it just drops off at one end and builds again at the other.
So, what do you think he'll be remembered for? And I think you're going to read us a bit, are you, of the piece? Well, go on. Tell us what he's remembered.
Is it Life
for.
in a Scotch Sitting Room?
Life in a Scotch Sitting Room. To Life in a Scotch Sitting Room, Volume 2. Now, Volume 2 is crucial because there is no Volume 1.
Of course,
that old gag.
Travelling
Wilburys. Yes.
So I think this is probably what people will remember him most for. A lot of people will remember his Magical Mystery Tour stuff. A lot of people can sing along to the songs, but the Life in a Scotch Sitting Room had a life as a series of episodes on John Peel sessions and Andy Kershaw sessions. Some of the episodes appear on his different albums, maybe a couple of episodes per album. And there's also a live recording from a recording at the Third Ear Centre in Glasgow. There's a series of episodes. In the book, it goes up to, I think, 21 episodes. And they purport to be about Ivor's childhood in Scotland. But it's a very bizarre childhood. And I just want to read the first half of a story, which to some extent centres on an unnamed brother. And it's episode 15. I will not attempt an Ivor Cutler impersonation, but because I have a Scottish background, some of my old Scots might come in. So this is episode 15. They don't have titles, apart from the number. One day, my brother took offence. Jumping onto the kitchen bed, he opened the cupboard above, drew himself up and shut the door. "Where is your brother?" asked my mother when she got back. "Up there," I pointed. "Why?" she queried. We sat. "Why?" she repeated, making the tomato sauce fall over. I called him a hypocrite, I muttered, looking askant at the jawbox. Do you know what hypocrite means? Laughed Mother in spite of herself. Blushing, I shook my head. She lifted the big brush and banged the cupboard. Come on out, you fool, your supper's getting cold. There was no response, so she shared it out. We all took some, but I had to hand mine back because of the look on my face. I'll not go any further. Suffice to say, his brother never reappears out of the cupboard and is never seen again.
It's a weird combination of all sorts of things. It reminds me slightly of Under Milkwood, with those kind of odd characters in the community. It reminds me slightly of the Royal Family TV show, and it reminds me slightly of Rawlinson End, actually, Viv Stanchel.
Well, that's another thing, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, they
this little fantasy world.
Yeah, the Rawlinson End and Life in Scott's Sitting Room appeared within a few months of each other. Ivor's appeared first, and Viv Stanchel's appeared shortly after. So whether there's a link there, I wouldn't like to say.
Yeah.
But this is, I mean, there are snippets of truth in Life in a Scotch Sitting Room. You can read through this, and yes, it's actually about a family called Cutler. And at some point we learn that actually, yes, the person telling the tales is a little boy called Ivor. But then you read other things about this rather odd family. They don't live in a tenement flat, which is where I've lived for the first few years of his life. They live in a house with a field at the end of the street. They don't seem to have a toilet because they all micturate into a large sponge, which mother or grandmother squeezes out of the kitchen window a few times a day.
Lovely.
And they never open their bowels because that was just not done. And so you learn all of these weird, clearly inaccuracies about Scottish life come through with little facts about Ivor's childhood.
So you say that there are still new generations of Ivor fans. Do they gather? Does that happen?
I'm not aware of regular gatherings, but there is a Facebook page which has upwards of 1,000 members, which is fairly active. And I know there is someone in Glasgow who's planning on an Ivor Cutler memorial supper for his centenary, which is on January the 15th, 2023. So there'll be a small get-together, I guess, there. There was a tribute. But
he's still very celebrated, isn't he? Particularly in Scottish kind of literary and musical circles. I mean, he's forever been kind of commemorated, isn't he, at festivals, at literary festivals?
Yeah, he was commemorated at Celtic Connections a couple of years ago.
Yeah.
There was a tribute album came out from a whole host of predominantly Scottish artists, led by Citizen Bravo and Raymond MacDonald. That came out 2 or 3 years ago. Robert Wyatt's on that. Robert's been a huge supporter of his work, really all his life since they first met in the early 70s. There are pockets of fans all over. There are pockets of fans in Japan, in the States, Canada, Eastern Europe. They're all over the place, but I think sort of very widespread. So physical get-togethers, I'm not aware of, but it'd be nice.
You never know; it may happen in due.
I love the idea that there are people. Usually at conventions like that, there are always people turning up dressed as the person they're celebrating. So just the idea, the whole line of people might arrive with little peak caps and holding a harmonium with them.
Yeah, the harmonium might be a bit of a struggle, but. Yeah, I think genuine Ivor's fans wouldn't try and dress up as Ivor. It would be a little.
No, it's Groucho Marx, isn't it? Really,
they wouldn't. Yeah.
Well, it's a fascinating story. To use the old slogan, I never knew there was so much in it. Really, because I, as I say, I only knew the latter half. Was the early stuff is absolutely extraordinary as well. It's a really worthwhile piece of work, Bruce. It really is.
Thank you.
And out in time to mark what would have been his 100th birthday.
Yes, that's right. January the 15th, as I said, 2023. So he made it into his mid-80s, and his last gig, I think he was 81 when that last performance was filmed by the BBC. So he had a couple of years of retirement after that, before his death. But yeah, the centenary, I hope, will be celebrated across the world with all the things that Ivor would have liked, like quiet cups of tea and
Yes, absolutely.
sandwich and no file.
Gruts.
Yes. Gruts, yes.
Gruts. If you never knew what they were, gruts for tea, one of my favourites. And everyone's eating gruts. You don't know anything about what gruts are, apart from the fact that if you leave them around, they might poison the dog if the dog ate them.
Yes.
That's your only clue.
and yet gruts is the sort of word that somehow must describe some sort of Scottish meal.
Yeah.
Yes, surely.
It sounds like it's
like neeps and tatties, isn't it?
It is, yeah.
Neeps and tatties and Cullen skink and gruts. Yeah.
Well, look, thanks very much for talking to us.
Nice to talk to you. It's a wonderful book. Really,
it
really
is.
recommended. Well, yeah, it's Ivor Cutler, A Life Outside the Sitting Room. Thanks so much. Thanks so much, Bruce.